When I first started this series with movies like The Green Knight and The Shining, I did not expect to one day cover the sequel to a Shrek spin-off. Yet here we are. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is a children's movie, but like the best of them, this one deals with some mature themes as well, and isn't afraid to scare those children. Puss has lived his entire life unafraid of death, in part because he loves the legend of an adventurer who laughs in its face, but also because as a cat in this fairy tale world, he's got 9 lives. Until now, after his latest cartoon death, crushed by a bell after yet another musical number, he's down to his last life. If he dies again, he doesn't have a spare, and there's no coming back. The movie doesn't waste much time getting back to its usual brand of punchlines and slapstick humor, but it does take some time to sit with Puss's grief and fear. Soon after learning his prognosis, Puss has a brush with death, as in actual death, in the form of a red-eyed, hooded wolf armed with a pair of sharp sickles. It's great character design, and his introduction is handled superbly. He doesn't show up screaming or spewing evil villain ramblings. Instead, the movie opts for dread, by slowly building to the realization that this wolf is no ordinary wolf. He pulls out Puss's wanted poster, and where it says dead or alive, points to dead. Puss draws his sword as though preparing for any other duel, but the wolf swats it away. Suddenly the cat sees the truth. He's alive only because the wolf has chosen to withhold the final blow, so he can savor the sweet scent of fear, especially from this creature who's never shown it before. Every strand of fur on Puss's body stands on end. This is it. His journey is over, and he doesn't get a 10th chance at life. And it's all amplified by a powerful storytelling technique: contrast. On its own, the scene works okay, but when it comes after a few minutes of carefree, fairy tale adventuring, like a car coming to a sudden stop, you feel the whiplash moving from one style to another. In the first, like any other cartoon, you have destructive mayhem without having to stop and worry about cuts, bruises, or broken bones. In the next, a drop of red blood on Puss's forehead suddenly adds stakes. He could die here. Like a room filled with chatter that goes silent, you feel that uncomfortable, wait a minute, this is serious. When I felt the same goosebumps as a cartoon cat, the movie had my attention. I was curious to see what it would have to say about a fear of death and a fear of life unfulfilled. After 8 lifetimes as a legend, you'd think Puss in Boots would feel pretty fulfilled, perhaps even ready to face death. Yet every time the wolf arrives with that ominous whistle straight out of a western, Puss does something he's never done in those prior lives. He runs. What is he so afraid of? Of course, death is scary, but beneath the obvious, it implicitly says that he feels a need for more life. And getting to the core, it says he hasn't gotten everything he needs from any of those 8 previous lives. There's something missing which gnaws at Puss, telling him he needs more so he can keep searching for it. He thinks he'll find what he needs in The Last Wish, a legendary star that will grant any one desire, including the return of those lost 8 lives. But it turns out the solution to his problem is internal, something to be solved without the need for magic. What is it exactly? One way to find out is by reflecting back on life after death and seeing what it lacked. Something we unfortunately can't do, but as a cat who's lived 8 lives already, Puss can. And when he looks back, he names only one regret: leaving Kitty Softpaws at the altar. Later, in the Cave of Lost Souls, Puss literally comes face to face with his past lives, and for the first time, sees them clearly. They come off as a bunch of showboating caricatures who lived only to party and bask in their own legend. And frankly, they're a bunch of jerks. No wonder he was so alone. Puss asks aloud, was the legend so big there was no room for anyone else? His prior lives, the so-called legends, assure him, oh, the legend's still big, Gato. It's you that got small. And they're not wrong. His world has gotten much smaller on this journey, much more focused on just two people, Softpaws and Perrito. Team friendship. But what Puss learns is that being small in this sense isn't such a bad thing. In fact, it's a lot more meaningful than focusing on a big life of fame and fortune. It means building strong connections and meaningful relationships. For that, Puss turns his back on his prior lives, choosing his makeshift family instead. In part, he learned his lesson from his time in the cat retirement home, where he buried his boots and took on the name Pickles. No longer connected to the legend, it becomes abundantly clear that he and the famed character are two different people. And though Puss in Boots is loved by all, it's a fanatic sort of love, between adoring fans and a celebrity, not the sort you find in meaningful relationships between people. The prior lives deride the idea, flippantly calling him Pickles. But facing one's own mortality does wonders for sorting out priorities, and stepping outside his lives to see them as an outsider looking in puts the finishing touches on his clarity. He spent too much time living as a legend, and not enough as a friend or partner, something which cost him a life with his love, Kitty Softpaws. Not anymore. He turns his back on the lost souls. It's time to get back to his friends. It's a change in priorities and a change in attitude, which will soon free Puss from his suffering, a lesson he missed earlier at the entrance of the dark forest. When they first arrived at the forest, Puss and Softpaws were too focused on their mission to see the obvious. They are the ones who paved their own paths with suffering, something represented by the transforming path to the wishing star, which changes depending on who touches the map. When it's Puss or Softpaws, the path is hell. For Puss, the obstacles are all based around a theme of death, and for Softpaws, loneliness. But when Perrito holds it, it's almost literally a walk in the park, whose most difficult obstacle is flowers which must be smelled in order to pass. It's a humorous sequence, but also a powerful lesson. Sometimes suffering is a choice. The rhyme inscribed on the map says it all. Follow this enchanted chart. It knows your path and knows your heart. The contents of their hearts determine the obstacles on the path. Puss and Softpaws have both become cynical, him fearing his dwindling lives, and her believing no one can be trusted, a belief which likely began when her owners removed her claws at a young age. But in the heart of a cartoonishly optimistic Perrito, the enchanted chart finds only flowers and rainbows. Why? Because unlike his cat counterparts, his life has been easy? No. When we met the dog, he was forced to disguise himself as a cat just to access food, and soon after entering the dark forest, we learn how he ended up on his own. His family rejected him. They put him in a packing crate and a dumpster, but both times he found his way back. So finally, they put him in a sock with a rock in it and tossed him in the river. He just barely managed to survive, and after that, never found his family again. To this day, he continues wearing that sock as a sweater. Either in blissful ignorance or a deliberate choice to see things in a positive light, Perrito imagines that his family was simply playing a game of hide and seek. Since he hasn't found them yet, the game continues to this day. And, the dog points out, he came out ahead. Now he's got a fun story to tell and a free sweater to boot. His traumatic backstory could have easily sent him down a dark path. Like Softpaws, he could trust no one and become a thief, only out for himself. Like one of the movie's villains, little, now big, Jack Horner, he could vengefully try to put himself above everyone else. But unlike everyone else in the movie in a race for the last wish, he has no interest in it, because he's happy with what he has. He's made two friends on his journey, Puss and Kitty. What else could he ask for? His positive attitude is, of course, cartoonishly exaggerated and bordering on manic, but the ever-changing path through the dark forest is a powerful metaphor. Our traumas and circumstances shape us, if we let them. Ultimately, we control what is in our hearts, and we can choose to walk a cynical path, inviting only more darkness into our lives, or we can put on a smile and invite some light onto the path. An appropriate metaphor, because light helps us see what's already there. By the end of the movie, having learned from their experiences and Perrito's attitude, Puss and Softpaws both realize they don't need a wish because they have each other. Friends and loved ones suddenly make their lives feel full. And while Jack Horner was too far gone to be saved, having straight up murdered a bunch of people in this children's movie, the other quasi-villain, Goldilocks, learns a similar lesson. As an orphan, she was raised by a family of bears. But she wants a real family, so she's pursued the last wish, hoping it'll grant her one. Her mad pursuit breaks the hearts of her bear family, teaching her, too, that she already has love in her life. Family and friends come in all shapes and sizes. Hers may be bear-shaped, but that doesn't make them any less real. So, like the rest of the characters, she relinquishes the wish, satisfied with what she has. In Softpaw's case, the light shows her that she doesn't need a wish to find someone she can trust. She already has it in Puss. But that doesn't mean he's perfect or that he can be counted on to never disappoint. Just like her, he's flawed, with things like fear, which sometimes lead to poor decisions like leaving her at the altar. Though we later learn he was leaving an empty altar because she wasn't there either, because she too was afraid that she could never compete with his first love, himself, or the legend he carries. But once she sees that he's let go of that legend and is no longer running, she forgives him, and like Goldilocks, relinquishes the wish. And once you're satisfied with what you have, death isn't so frightening, because death eventually comes for us all, but it only wins if you live in fear of it. Puss is at his worst throughout the movie when his goal is to run from death. That's what put him in a home, wasting away the rest of his days, surrounded by cats less sentient than himself. And it's what sends him to betray his friends, taking the last wish for himself. But once he realizes the good things he has, suddenly, rather than run from something, he fights for something. He stands toe-to-toe with death, promising he'll fight to hold on to his one precious life, the only one which flashes before his eyes when death makes his final arrival, the one where he's found fulfillment and no longer needs another 8 to find it. So he'll fight. And just like in our less metaphorical real world, when you aren't afraid of it, death loses, because it no longer controls your actions or leads you astray. In the real world, that translates to celebrating the gift of life, appreciating your loved ones, and stopping to smell the flowers, like the dark forest told us earlier. In the fairy tale world, it means that for death, the game is over. He was here to savor fear and to knock a legend off his high horse. But once he finds that Puss in Boots has let go of the big legend and become focused on a much smaller world, the fun is over. Death sheaths his weapons and leaves them alone, promising he'll one day return. Sí, hasta la muerte, Puss replies, or yes, until death, as in he'll remain committed to his friends, continue to persevere, and never waver on his determination, until the inevitable end which he's finally accepted. These are lessons that have been told in other stories, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time it was by way of an animated cat. On the outside, this looks like any other cartoon comedy, but like feeding a dog a pill, that's just a peanut buttery exterior to cover up the bitter medicine. The same sort of medicine you'd find in an R-rated movie like Logan, for example. And themes of facing one's own mortality or what it takes to live a fulfilling life may seem too dark for children, but I remember being a kid, and I remember thinking about this stuff. So it's nice to see these themes touched on in an accessible way that'll resonate with a younger audience, especially when it comes to lessons which the sooner learned, the better. Because unlike Puss, we don't get 9 lives to figure it out. In our one life, the sooner we learn to be happy, the more life we get to enjoy without cynicism or an ever-present fear of death. I think we can wrap it up there. As always, let me know if there are other movies you'd like me to cover in this series. And if you found this one a little too heartwarming for your tastes, don't worry. I promise to get back to evil hotels and genocidal AI soon. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more. With that, thank you for watching, and see you on the next One Take.